everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel. This is my March wrap up. To be honest, can't really remember what I read in March because I'm recording this a little bit later than I normally do, and so I feel like I'm in full-on April mode now. March doesn't matter anymore. So let's find out what I read together and I can give you my thoughts on all the books. Looking back at my statistics, it does look like March was a very meh month compared to the previous 2 months of the year. So I read a total of 11 books, which is very good. The number isn't as high as I have been reading recently. I think I partly burnt myself out in February, and then a lot of things happened in March in my personal life. So it's understandable that I read slightly less than I had in previous months. However, my average rating was only 3.18, which is low. Previously in February my rating was 3.63 and in January it was 3.5, so 3.18 is awful. So let's figure out what the hell happened together. Okay, so starting off, I read the first 2 books in the Plated Prisoner series because I'm trying to recap the books for Recap Tins, and I knew that the 5th book, I think 5th, 6th, the final book in the series is coming out sometime this year, and I thought it was happening in the summer, but it turns out it's not coming out until December according to Goodreads. So I marathoned this entire series for no reason, which it's really quite annoying. I will, I think, do a full reading vlog, or like series review rather, when the final book comes out, because I do want to talk about it. I'm gonna have to write all my thoughts down in advance, I think. So the first 2 books are called Guild and Glint. I had to look that up because I can never remember which one is which. What I had previously heard about this series was that it's a King Midas retelling, so a Greek myth retelling, about a main character called Oren who is like gold touched. Midas has apparently like turned her into like sort of half gold, as in she can still move around and stuff, but her skin and hair are gold. And I had heard that it was like smutty. I had heard that it was a fantasy series, and I think that's it. Like, considering how popular this series is, I hadn't really heard many details about it, which I kind of appreciate because I wouldn't have wanted to be spoiled about the fact that nothing happens in the first 2 books. We start off in Guild with the main character, like I said, Oren, who is basically a sex slave for King Midas. She is his favoured and she is kept in a cage so that she can't escape. But this cage isn't like a tiny cage in the corner of the room. She can like travel between rooms and stuff behind these bars. And in the beginning of the first book, King Midas is doing some sort of like political play. He ends up kind of taking over another kingdom. He rules one and he takes over another. And so he travels over there, leaving Oren alone. And then she starts to realise that maybe she quite likes being away from King Midas because he's not the greatest person. She and all of the guards and stuff end up travelling over to the other kingdom where King Midas now is to kind of, you know, meet up with him again. So they start travelling. I don't know if I should carry on because there are only like 2 more things that happen in this book, and so it would spoil the entire thing. But there's a little bit about their journey, and then there are issues on the journey, and then the book kind of ends after introducing another potential love interest who is quite obviously the love interest from the way he was described. And then Glint picks up exactly where Guild left off, and a little bit more happens in this one, but these 2 books definitely could have been condensed into one. These books did not need to go on for that long because very, very little happens. So I gave Guild 2 stars and I gave Glint 2.5 stars. So it got mildly better, just not amazing. And I don't really understand the hype. Something else I wanted to mention is that these books are not YA at all. The first book, on page 6, there is an orgy happening in front of the main character, and yet my library has labelled the first 2 books as teen. So I do need to write them an email about this, and not to be a Karen or anything, but these are definitely adult books and I don't want any teenagers picking it up mistakenly. Like, if they want to go and seek them out, then go right ahead, but I don't want them thinking that these are YA books because they're not. So yeah, looking after the youth in Buckinghamshire. Then I read Our Wives Under the Sea, which I gave 2.5 stars. You can see the reason for my low average rating. This one, I'm sure you have heard about. It was very popular last year when it released. It's about 2 wives who, they're married to each other. One of them went on a deep sea mission and then didn't come back for months and months because she was trapped under the sea. It's told from both of their points of view. So in present day, the wife who stayed at home is now dealing with the return of the wife who was stuck under the sea and how that wife has changed, how the experience kind of changed her. And then we flash back in other chapters to follow the other wife's point of view as she is trapped under the sea, and we kind of see kind of what's going on there. But it was all very vague and like nothing specific really was said or resolved, so it was just a bit of a weird book and it's not really my kind of thing, so I gave it 2.5 stars. I then read True Crime Story, which is a thriller, I guess, mystery crime sort of thing. This follows a bunch of university students who are up in either Liverpool or Manchester, I can't remember which now, but a fellow student went missing quite a few years ago. A reporter is looking into this story and what possibly happened to her, and then the narrator, or the person who is compiling all of these files, because it's told in mixed media format, is connected to this reporter in some way and sort of takes over in part. It was an interesting read, as in like it kept me reading, but I feel like the multimedia aspect wasn't utilised quite as well as it could have been. It was told mostly in emails and in transcripts, where the reporter was interviewing people who were involved in the, possibly in the disappearance back in the day. And then there was the odd like newspaper article thrown in there, but I feel like the author could have included more variety in the mixed media that he was including. So I only gave this one 3 stars because I feel like it had a lot of potential, and I did enjoy it, but it didn't really stand out, and I've read better thriller books told in this kind of format. I then read Earthdivers 2, which is a comic, the second book in a comic series by Stephen Graham Jones, and this is basically set in the far future where the earth is basically apocalyptic, resources have died, basically a wasteland, and so the Native American main characters want to go back in time because they found like a time travel cave and they want to go back in time and kill Columbus, because they figure if Columbus never discovered America or the Americas, a lot of this stuff wouldn't have happened, because America is like the problem. Nothing much really happened in this second comic, so I think what I'm going to do going forward is wait for like all of the volumes to be, or all of the comics to be put into one volume, which I think is happening later this year, because I feel like it will be much better for me to read it all in one go, because at the moment it's kind of drip feeding the story to me and it's not as good as I think it could be if I read it all at once. So I'm going to put a pause on this series for now, but that doesn't mean that I don't think I'm going to enjoy it. I just think it will make more sense for me to marathon the entire thing together when it's all bound up in one. And then I read a really excellent book, which I gave 5 stars, and that is Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This one is the first book by Gillian McAllister that I've ever read, and it was fantastic. So this is about a mother who one evening sees her son walking home up the street. She watches from the window as he stabs someone, and then he gets arrested, and she has no idea why he has done this. It seems very out of the blue. Her son is a teenager, and the man that he stabbed was an adult, and she doesn't think there's any connection between them, so she's obviously freaking out. She goes to sleep that evening, and then she wakes up the next day and it's one day prior to the day that the original event happened. So she starts going back in time, and it's not always by one day. Eventually she starts sort of jumping back over longer periods of time as she's trying to figure out what happened to her son and what led up to him wanting to stab someone, or needing to stab someone, as the case may be. She's sort of fumbling around trying to figure out what happened, and then all of these secrets come out, and I thought it was really, really thrilling. This is such a well-told thriller book. I was kept on the edge of my seat the entire time. I loved it, so that's obviously why I gave it 5 stars. I really liked the relationship between the main character and her son. Seeing her sort of jump back in time, look at herself and her son's relationship in a different way, and trying to figure out what she could have possibly have done wrong, and whether she was as close to her son as she could have been, if she was putting enough care and attention into their relationship as she could have. It was just a really interesting way of telling a mother-child story while also looking at a murder, and also with time travel, which I love. Time loops are definitely like my thing. Yeah, really enjoyed this one. I'd highly recommend it if you're into thriller books. I loved it, and I would probably reread it again soon because it was really, really good. And then I started to have a bit of a crisis because I am not reading enough books from my physical TBR. I'm reading mainly library books at the moment because I'm requesting all of my NetGalley books from the library, and that's a whole different discussion. But that's the reason why I randomly decided to pick up Firelight by Sophie Jordan, which is a book that I got in 2010 or 2011, one of the two. I got this when I first started booktubing. It was a complete cover buy. These kinds of covers were like the in thing when I started booktubing and book blogging. I don't know if you can tell, but she has like scales around her face because she is a dragon. It's very much a YA paranormal fantasy sort of story where the main character moves to a new town, has to keep her paranormal side a secret, and then all of these other things start coming out. In this one, the main character is, like I said, a dragon. She has to leave her sort of pride, I guess they're called, because they're not great people. And so she moves to a town in the middle of the desert, and then she comes across dragon hunters. One of them is a teenage boy, and obviously like they get to know each other. This is okay. I gave it 2.5 stars. I probably would have enjoyed it more back in the day, but even back then I think I would have found it very generic. It's definitely nothing special, I didn't think. I can't remember what the vibe was when it first came out. I know that everyone was obsessed with the covers, but I don't think anyone really like loved the book, at least in my like blogging circles. It's the first in a trilogy, and in this first book nothing really happened. It followed every single beat that every other YA paranormal of the time followed. So I can't say that I recommend going back and reading this one. It's definitely not going to be a YA classic, but I'm glad that I finally got it off my shelf because I'm fairly sure this was in one of my first ever book hauls, which, yeah, is embarrassing, but I'm proud of myself for finally picking it up and being in the mood to read it. I think I knew that it was going to be a really quick read and nothing stand out, but it was kind of what my brain needed at the time. Needless to say, I won't be carrying on with the trilogy though. I don't think there's really any need to. I then read Set On You, which is an adult romance book about a fitness influencer and a fireman. It's a hate to love romance. They first meet at the gym and he is kind of like in her space and she doesn't like that. And he carries on being irritating and she really doesn't like him, and then she realises that he is actually quite sweet. And a firefighter, which is always, you know, cool, I suppose, if you're into that. I really liked the beginning of this book, but my issue was that it kind of lasted a bit too long. I think this is a very long book for a romance book, and so the author was really dragging things out. Not enough happened for it to be that long. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was nothing amazing. I might read the second book because I know that it's about a book blogger or book influencer, which is the main character from this one's sister. They're both on the internet all the time, I suppose. But this isn't very memorable and I'm not going to remember it this time next year. It was just okay. I then read Pod, which was a book about dolphins. It's told from the point of view of a dolphin and it was honestly awful. I gave it 2.5 stars on my spreadsheet, but I'm probably going to put that down to 2 or 1.5 because honestly it was bad. So we follow the main dolphin, who is called Aya, and she is a bit different from her family, from her pod, because she can't hear the ocean and connect with it in the same way that they can. She's not entirely deaf, she can hear other things, but she doesn't have the same connection that her family do. So we're following her as she kind of gets more and more sort of disconnected from her pod, and we also follow various other characters who are like dolphins or various other like fish and I think there's like a whale point of view as well. And I love the concept of this one. I thought it was really, really good. It also follows a dolphin who was raised in captivity, and then I can't remember if he escapes or if he's kind of just let loose by his captors. So the concept was brilliant, but this one was really, really dark and I didn't really go into this expecting that, and I feel like it was needlessly dark in some places. Like I got what the author was going for with all of the conservationism and environmentalism and how humans are ruining the planet. That was all fine and I appreciated that. That's what I was expecting. But then the main character and various other characters as well were assaulted multiple times. The main character herself was gang raped at least once or twice, and then also sexually assaulted by characters multiple times as well. And honestly, like, it was icky and I didn't feel the need for it. Like, I can understand it happening once because if the author is kind of going in that direction and seeing how that affects the main character, but I don't think it needed to happen over and over again. It was just needless, so I didn't like it. So I'm gonna lower my rating, I think, to 2 or 1.5. This was also my first book for my Women's Prize for Fiction challenge that I'm doing. I'm currently only 2 books in. I need to hurry up a little bit, but I'm not really in a rush because I don't think the winner is being announced until June, so I still have some time to get my act together and read some more. But this one had better not win because I hated it. I then read Monstrous Volume 2, which I enjoyed a lot more than the first one actually. It started to make a lot more sense. I found that in the first book the world building was just too immense for just the one volume, but in this one I feel like the author took a bit more time to explain the backstory of the main character and her family and the world building in general, so it's all starting to click for me. So I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is a fantasy graphic novel series about a main character who has some sort of connection with like a demon. She has a demon arm basically. I'm sure you've probably heard of this series and I'd recommend going to look it up on Goodreads, because while I say that I understand it, I cannot explain it to you in a way that makes sense. Go look it up if you want to find a summary or something. And then finally I read a second book for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and that was Wandering Souls, which I gave 5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. So this is about a refugee family from Vietnam. They travelled from Vietnam to Hong Kong and then over to the UK after the Vietnam War, and it's basically set in a time where the Vietnamese government are going after anyone who could seem to be anti-communist. So the family decide they have to escape and they split into 2. They divide their family basically in half, and the main character is I think the oldest sister. Yeah, she must be. She's the oldest sister and she travels with her 2 younger brothers, and then in a few days it's planned that her 2 parents will travel with the toddlers and the I think 3 or 4 younger children, because there are toddlers and babies and stuff. They have to get a boat over to Hong Kong. As you can probably imagine, it's a really devastating story. The first half of the family do make it to Hong Kong and the second half of the family don't. They unfortunately pass away on the journey. It's all very tragic, and then this also gives the author an opportunity to introduce the main character of one of the dead children, one of the dead siblings, and we see his point of view, which is, I think, related to Vietnamese beliefs, in which if people aren't buried in their homeland or in their home village, their souls wander. And so that's kind of what's happening with one of the children there. But it's mainly told from the oldest sister's point of view, with a few other characters sort of interspersed throughout the story. And we see her arrive in the UK and really struggle with her decisions that she has made, and how she's going to look after her family and also prioritise them, at least the surviving ones, and also take care of herself and when she should put herself first, because she feels guilty about doing that. It's also set in Margaret Thatcher's England, Britain, which was not a good time for refugees, and I really liked the fact that also interspersed throughout the story were some non-fiction sort of articles or information about events that related to the story, such as how Margaret Thatcher kind of weaseled her way out of accepting refugees in Britain, or as many as other countries did. It was really, really interesting, and I really liked what the author was doing. I ended up just really enjoying the way that the story was told. I really enjoyed the main characters, I really connected with them, and I felt honest, like, devastation with what they were going through. I don't think this is following the author's real life experience, because I think she grew up in France to a Vietnamese family and then travelled to either the USA or Canada and then moved to the UK. So I don't think it's kind of like a memoir sort of thing, but obviously she probably knows people who did go through this sort of thing, and she's clearly done her research as well. Yeah, really enjoyed this one, and I gave it 5 stars. And I know I've only read 2 women's prize books, but if this one wins, I wouldn't be angry at this point. I do have a lot more to read. I'm staring at the pile of women's prize books that I have still to read over there, and there are a lot of them. So yeah, I would highly recommend reading this one. It's a really short book, so it won't take you long to read at all. I thought it was really well done and very emotional, so give it a go if you are interested. And I think that's all of the books that I ended up reading in March. I'm just going to change my pod rating and see how it affects my average, and I'll tell you what my average turns out to be. 3.09. So this is officially the worst month ever. I'm hoping April is going to be a lot better, because I've already read a lot of really good books. Check out my April TBR if you haven't already. Coming up this month, I've got a lot of plans. I'm doing a few different reading vlogs. I have a lot of videos planned. I need to show you my entire TBR pile as part of a zero TBR thing that I'm doing. I'm also doing try a chapter for a zero TBR thing that I'm doing as well. And like I said, I'm trying to read all of the Women's Prize for Fiction books and doing a vlog on that. So I've got a lot in the works. For the time being, you'll probably see more sit down videos from me as I'm working my way through all of these reading vlogs. At some point I will be uploading many reading vlogs if I can keep up with them. That was it. Thank you for watching. Hopefully April will be much better than this month, and yeah, thanks again, and I'll speak to you all in the next video. Bye.